The sexual violence of Genghis Khan reshaped an entire continent through calculated terror. In a dim tent thick with incense and dread, a young woman's hand shakes beneath silk covers. Beside her lies the most feared man in history, eyes shut in smug contentment. She is one of thousands, but tonight she will be the last. Her fingers close around cold steel hidden beneath her pillow. Outside, the storm swallows the sound of her shallow breaths. This Tangut princess, who watched her family burn 3 years earlier, has waited for this night through endless humiliation. The blade catches the glow of the candle as she lifts it. Moments from now, the conqueror who claimed 7,000 women will learn that conquest carries a cost. The man who built an empire on relentless assault is about to meet justice at the hands of his final prey. History will call it a legend, but the screams that rip through the darkness will be all too real. You might ask, how did one man's private pain evolve into the largest campaign of sexual violence in recorded history? How did a single kidnapping set in motion events that left 16 million descendants across 2 continents? To find the truth, we must go back 25 years to an abduction that altered the fate of the world. What began with one stolen bride would end with a hidden knife and an empire forged in suffering. For 8 months, the cries from Borte's tent haunted the steppe. In 1184, Genghis Khan was still Temujin, nothing more than a minor tribal chief trying to survive the brutal rivalries of the Mongolian plains. He had married Borte as a teenager in a political alliance meant to secure peace. But the Merkits had not forgotten an old blood debt, a woman taken by Temujin's father decades before. The attack came at dawn. 30 riders tore through the camp while Temujin escaped on horseback, leaving his new wife behind. For the man who would one day rule nations, this moment of abandonment left a wound that never closed. Borte vanished into Merkit hands and became the property of Chilja, a warrior who took her as spoils. 8 months she remained their captive. Records soften the truth, but the outcome speaks for itself. With the help of his sworn brother Jamukha, Temujin finally freed her. She was heavily pregnant. The boy, Joki, would live forever under the shadow of disputed blood. His name meant guest, a public reminder of his uncertain paternity. Temujin claimed him as his own, yet in private, doubt gnawed at him. In the quiet, his eyes searched the boy's face for Merkit features. But Borte's ordeal had only just begun. Her rescue marked the start of something darker inside Temujin, something history would never forget. He had saved his wife's body, but not her honor. In Mongol culture, a woman taken by enemies carried a stain that never washed away. Every sidelong glance at Joki reminded him of those 8 months, months filled with sounds he could only imagine. The man who fled on horseback was gone. In his place stood someone who would never run again. The Merkits were the first to pay. Not just the warriors who had stolen Borte, but their entire tribe. Women, children, the elderly. None were spared. Death alone wasn't enough for Temujin. He wanted them to suffer as Borte had suffered, to live with the same shame that now haunted his household. This became his blueprint. Sexual violence was no longer random cruelty. It was deliberate revenge, magnified with each conquest. Every captured woman was, in his mind, repayment for Borte's captivity. To his generals, the motive was obvious. Temujin could not undo what had been done to Borte, so he would force the same fate on the world. He could not kill children twice, so he would destroy them symbolically through every enemy bloodline. He could not reclaim those 8 months, so he would take lifetimes from others. What came next would shape history. He institutionalized his trauma. A personal vendetta became imperial policy. The man who could not protect one woman would claim thousands. The husband who lost control would control the reproductive future of entire civilizations. Psychologists today recognize the pattern. Trauma turned into dominance, victimhood flipped into authority, but few wounds in history spread so far. In trying to erase the shame of one woman's violation, Temujin became history's most prolific perpetrator. In seeking to bury his own humiliation, he created an empire built on systematic degradation. The victim had become the ultimate oppressor, multiplying his pain across millions. His generals noticed the shift. After Borte's rescue, Temujin spoke no more of mercy. Women became spoils, not people. Conquest meant ownership, physical control over an enemy's bloodline. The real horror was not the rescue. It was what followed. For Temujin, sexual domination was spiritual victory. Taking enemy women was more than humiliation. It erased their future. Each forced pregnancy diluted enemy blood and replaced it with Mongol blood. Rape became ethnic engineering. Such a philosophy required structure. To traumatize a continent, you needed organization, not chaos. The same strategic brilliance that built the Mongol postal network created the most efficient system of sexual enslavement the world had ever seen. This was sexual revenge on an imperial scale, one that would poison the bloodlines of half the known world. Even the records were chilling. A scribe's hand trembled as he wrote the number 7,000. Not a death toll, not a tribute list, but the official tally of Genghis Khan's personal women. The scale demanded its own administration. Women weren't only counted, they were ranked. After each conquest, appointed officials inspected the captured women, judging them on a 100-point scale. Beauty, youth, virginity, noble lineage, all scored with calculated precision. A virgin princess might score in the mid-90s, a merchant's widow perhaps in the 60s. The evaluations took place in open courtyards, the women stripped bare while clerks circled with ledgers. Survivors recalled the dry scrape of styluses on wood, reducing human beings to numbers. The process was fast. There were thousands to process, quotas to meet. Scores above 90 were reserved for the Khan himself. Those in the 80s went to favored generals, the 70s to officers, the 60s to common soldiers as rewards. Women became literal currency in a sexual economy. Below 60 lay the darkest fate, assignment to the mobile military brothels that followed every Mongol army. These were not chaotic dens of violence, but organized institutions, run with the same efficiency as supply chains. The women received numbers, not names. Their movements were tracked, their usage recorded. Surviving records, some still stored in Chinese archives, read like inventory manifests. 20 Tangut maidens, scores 45 to 55, assigned to Regiment 4. Sorting extended to ethnicity. Russians in one section, Persians in another, Tanguts elsewhere. Different origins were treated like different vintages of wine, varieties catalogued for exploitation. Managing this required its own command structure. Specialized guards, supply lines for food and clothing, even medical care, not out of mercy, but to keep the inventory functional. Pregnant women were tracked separately, their children's lineage carefully noted. For those at the bottom of the scale, survival was measured in weeks. Assignment to the brothel meant servicing dozens of men a day until the body simply failed. In the Mongol system, this was not random cruelty. It was policy, planned and perfected. The Mongol obsession with efficiency extended even to sexual violence. Their doctrine was simple: maximize usage, minimize maintenance. Women who could no longer serve were discarded like broken gear. For those who ranked high in the evaluations, the nightmare took a different shape. Being claimed by a general meant exclusive ownership, but also complete isolation. These women lived in mobile palaces, silk-lined prisons that shadowed the army's march. They existed only to satisfy one man's desires, their lives measured in his moods. The Khan's personal 7,000 women endured even tighter control. They were organized by ethnicity, living trophies of Mongol conquest. Chinese courtesans in one section, Persian princesses in another, Russian noblewomen in a third. Walking through Genghis Khan's Gur complex was like touring a living map of conquered peoples. Managing such numbers required innovation. The Mongols developed rotation schedules, tracking systems, and regular medical examinations. Women past childbearing age were reassigned as attendants to younger captives. Those who bore sons received higher status, a perverse incentive to submit. Ledgers exposed the scale. Financial records show the cost of feeding, clothing, and transporting thousands of women across continents rivaled the upkeep of cavalry divisions. Maintaining the sexual slavery apparatus consumed roughly 15% of imperial revenues, a state investment in organized rape. This was not random brutality. It was rape industrialized, bureaucratized, and optimized. The same administrative genius that governed lands from Korea to Poland created the most efficient system of sexual exploitation the world had ever seen. The Chinese chronicler Xiao Hong witnessed the process. He described auction blocks where generals bid on women with gold stolen from the same cities these women had once called home. The irony was intentional. Your family's wealth now bought your daughter's captivity. But even 7,000 women could not satisfy what Genghis planned next. In 1202, after defeating the Tatar Confederation, the Khan issued an order that sealed the fate of thousands, every Tatar woman over the height of a wagon wheel. The Tatars had poisoned his father years earlier. The wound had never healed, and now came the reckoning. The method was exact. First, execute every Tatar male taller than a wagon axle, about 3 feet, wiping out adult men and adolescent boys, sparing only small children too young to remember their origins. The women faced another destiny. They were distributed among Mongol soldiers as methodically as food rations. Younger women went to elite warriors, older ones to common troops. This was not a collapse of discipline. It was discipline weaponized. Witnesses recalled women forced to watch their husbands' executions, only to be handed to the killers moments later. Families were torn apart, mothers separated from daughters, sisters sent to different units, because the Mongols knew isolation deepened the wound. The order had a purpose: to preserve Tatar bloodlines, but only through Mongol fathers. Every child born would be Mongol in blood, language, and loyalty, erasing the original ethnicity. It was genetic conquest through the womb. The logistics were meticulous. Pregnant women were marked and monitored. Those who resisted became public examples, punished in ways meant to terrify others into compliance. Modern law would call it a campaign of forced pregnancy, genocide by biology. Not all submitted. Some Tatar women chose death over subjugation, leaping from cliffs or into rivers. The Mongols countered with tighter controls, binding women's hands at night, stationing guards specifically to prevent suicide. Even death became a privilege denied. A surviving account from Chinese archives describes the first night. The camp stretched for miles, and from every corner rose the sounds of grief, pain, and rage. By morning, an entire culture had been violated. What happened with the Tatars became a template. Previous conquerors had killed or enslaved. The Mongols devised something worse: biological absorption. They didn't just want to destroy enemies. They wanted to consume them, replacing their bloodlines with Mongol stock. In the campaigns that followed, local women were gathered, evaluated, and distributed. Resistance brought public rape followed by execution. Demonstrations meant to break any thought of defiance. Compliance meant survival, but survival as breeding stock for the empire. The Mongols kept count. Military records listed the number of women allocated after each victory as casually as the number of arrows spent. One general bragged in official reports of receiving 40 Tatar virgins as his share. The cruelty was deliberate. Soldiers forced women to praise the Khan in Mongol phrases during the assaults, demanding not just physical submission but spiritual surrender. The Tatars were only the beginning. Each new campaign refined the process, finding the ideal ratio of women to soldiers, improving suicide prevention, perfecting distribution. Sexual violence became military science. Within a generation, distinct Tatar identity vanished. The children of rape grew up as Mongols, taught to revere the man who had destroyed their people. Genetic studies now confirm what survivors said. Mongol Y chromosomes replaced local male lines across former Tatar lands. It was practice for what came next, a sexual holocaust that would engulf 2 continents. In the aftermath of each conquest came the selection. Women and girls were gathered in city squares, arranged in lines, and inspected like livestock. This was not chaos. It was the organized extraction of human resources, measured in minutes, and decided in a glance. The process followed strict, calculated steps. First, women were stripped of all clothing and jewelry, officially to prevent concealed weapons, but more so to simplify inspection. They stood naked under snow, rain, or the burning sun while Mongol officials moved along the rows with their scoring sheets. Age was the first filter. Girls younger than 7 were almost always killed, too young for immediate use, too costly to raise. Women older than 40 faced the same outcome unless they possessed rare abilities, such as medical knowledge or specialized crafts. The prime age bracket ran from 8 to 35, though preferences shifted by rank. Physical beauty carried weight, but it wasn't the sole factor. The Mongols sought specific traits: unblemished skin, straight teeth, symmetrical faces. They inspected for illness, deformity, and pregnancy. Virgins fetched the highest value, making invasive examinations routine. Selection also weighed status. Noble-born women were spotted by their poise, soft hands untouched by labor. These were marked ISA, reserved for gifts to allied chieftains or rewards for loyal service. Political usefulness could outweigh appearance. Yet being chosen offered no safety. High scorers were taken as the personal property of individual warriors, while lower scorers were assigned to the EPA, the collective brothels attached to military units. Both paths led through systematic sexual violence, forced pregnancies, cultural erasure, and early death. The process itself was meant to break the spirit. Women were ordered to walk, turn, and pose while soldiers jeered and made crude remarks. Mothers were torn from daughters, sometimes forced to compete for survival. The Mongols understood that humiliation paved the way for domination. One Persian account describes the selection in Samarkand. 40,000 women were assembled in the central square, examined in turn over 3 days. Those not chosen were driven beyond the city walls. The screams that followed revealed their fate. The psychological cruelty was deliberate. Women never learned the exact standards, never understood why sisters were separated or friends chosen over them. This uncertainty bred hopelessness and made survival, however horrific, seem like fortune. The rejected faced 3 grim options. Some were killed instantly, their bodies left in the open as warnings. Others were handed to the lowest-ranking troops for repeated abuse until death. The third group became forced camp followers, serving in comfort stations that trailed the baggage trains. Even those selected entered a strict hierarchy. The highest scorers went to the Great Khan himself, followed by generals, then officers, elite warriors, and finally common soldiers. Conditions differed by rank, but the dehumanization remained constant. The Mongols even refined distribution. Selected women were placed in temporary holding areas, human warehouses, sorted by score, ethnicity, and assigned fate. Guards prevented escape or suicide while keeping inventory. Some captives tried to disfigure themselves to avoid selection, slashing faces, breaking teeth, smearing dirt into wounds. But the Mongols punished entire groups for one person's self-mutilation, ensuring most didn't try. Among those in the lines was Gurbel, a 17-year-old Tangut princess. Despite her efforts to conceal her beauty, she scored a near-perfect 98 and was destined for Genghis Khan's personal collection. She saw her sisters handed to soldiers, heard her mother's cries from the rejection zone, but survived the selection, beginning a path that would lead, 3 years later, to a tent and a hidden knife. The beauty parades revealed the Mongol contradiction, masters of empire building who reduced conquest to personal degradation. They created systems of organized cruelty, turning bureaucratic order into an instrument of mass suffering. The empire's famed postal network, the Yam, offered 3 official services: fresh horses, hot meals, and captive women. Spanning from Korea to Eastern Europe, this chain of stations was a marvel of communication and military mobility, but it also housed the largest organized network of sexual slavery in history. Every major station included what Chinese sources called comfort houses. These were not improvisations but purpose-built facilities, dormitories for captives, rooms for soldiers, and offices for meticulous record-keeping. The network functioned with institutional efficiency. Station masters kept detailed logs of each woman's origin, condition, and availability. Soldiers presented tokens showing their rank, which determined access. Payment was unnecessary. It was a state-provided service, funded by the imperial treasury. Women were frequently rotated between stations, scattering them far from home to break language and cultural bonds. A Russian captive might serve in Mongolia, while a Mongol woman could be sent to a Persian outpost. The records are chilling. Surviving logs from Chinese stations show daily counts, how many soldiers each woman serviced, who was pregnant, and who had died overnight. This bureaucratic coldness reduced people to a resource ledger. Station masters balanced deadly quotas. Too many deaths brought investigation. Too few services hinted at inefficiency. The result was calculated abuse, working women to death while keeping just enough alive to sustain demand. Over time, the age of victims dropped. In the early years, women ranged from 15 to 35. By the empire's height, girls as young as 7 appeared in station records, chosen because they survived longer under extreme exploitation. Medical care existed, but only to protect soldiers from disease, not to help the victims. Even healing was turned into another tool of control. Pregnant captives were kept under constant watch until they gave birth. Their newborns were taken immediately, boys sent for military training, girls reserved for future station service. This was generational slavery, built into the structure of the empire. Each postal station on the map meant dozens of shattered childhoods. The scale is difficult to grasp. Even conservative records place the number of women trapped in the station system at its height at over 50,000. And that only counts official facilities. Temporary outposts, field camps, and occupied cities ran similar systems beyond any central records. Transportation between stations was another ordeal. Special wagons, built as mobile prisons, carried chained women in cramped rows. They were given barely enough food to survive the journey. There was no privacy, no sanitation. Many died on the road. Their bodies were tossed out along the Silk Road like spoiled cargo. Guards recorded these deaths in their ledgers without emotion, reducing human lives to damaged goods. Resistance was crushed through public torture, turning disobedience into a warning for others. Compliance was rewarded with small privileges, an extra scrap of food, a blanket in winter, creating a hierarchy among slaves and making victims part of their own oppression. Some stations had specific roles. Near Karakoram, one was reserved for virgins, intended for visiting dignitaries. A station in Persia kept only pregnant women. Another in China trained younger girls for later use. Industrialized rape needed specialized facilities, and the postal network connected them to the wider system of military brothels, urban comfort houses, and private collections. Women became a commodity moved alongside troops, messages, and supplies. The Mongols even created inspection systems. Officials traveled between stations to investigate unusual death rates, enforce quotas, and ensure efficiency. They carried manuals on managing sexual slavery, reducing atrocity to administrative procedure. Local communities were ordered to supply a set number of girls each year. Failure brought collective punishment. Villages burned, families executed. Parents faced an impossible choice: surrender their daughters or lose their entire community. At the center of this machine sat the mobile court, where the empire's political reach was measured in the bodies of conquered women. Genetics tells the rest of the story. 16 million men alive today carry the Y chromosome of Genghis Khan and his direct male line. Medieval chroniclers claimed it. Modern DNA evidence confirms it. This was not accidental. It was deliberate, calculated. The leadership understood heredity long before science proved it. They saw that traits passed through bloodlines and turned this into policy. Replace the blood of enemies with Mongol blood. One soldier could impregnate dozens of women each year. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of soldiers over decades, add the nobility's exclusive access to thousands more, and you get a demographic transformation spanning continents. The strategy targeted specific populations. Noble families were hit hardest. Their lines could continue only through Mongol fathers. The Mongols called it watering foreign fields with Mongol rain. For the women, pregnancy was just the beginning of the ordeal. They could never return home. Their children were marked by mixed heritage, too Mongol for one people, too foreign for the other. These children were living reminders of conquest, both despised and used as tools of the empire. The Mongols kept pregnant captives in guarded camps, giving them better food and shelter, not from kindness, but to ensure strong offspring. Miscarriages were investigated and sometimes punished. Wombs became state property. Sons were sent to military training. Daughters were raised for distribution. In some regions, pre-Mongol Y chromosome lineages disappeared entirely as male populations were killed and women forced to bear Mongol children. Modern studies show 8% of men in former Mongol territories share an identical Y chromosome from the conquest era. In some areas, the figure is nearly 30%. Each number is the genetic scar of an assault. There were cultural consequences too. Children of Mongol fathers often had more privileges than pure natives: access to education, positions in administration, a path out of poverty. Some women sought Mongol partners in hopes of improving their children's futures. The empire exploited this. Half Mongol children ranked above pure natives but below pure Mongols, forming a buffer class that often served the empire against their mother's people. To make this policy work, the Mongols tracked paternity, inheritance, and survival. Children were registered. Mothers were monitored. Killing a Mongol's child, even if conceived through rape, meant death for the entire family. Forced childbirth also served as psychological warfare. Every Mongol child in a conquered town was a walking reminder of defeat. The women who bore them were forced to nurse them, deepening the bond to the conqueror's bloodline. Refusal meant torture. Maternal instinct became a weapon turned against its owner. Some women resisted in terrible ways: secret abortions, disguised infanticide, suicides that killed both mother and unborn. The Mongols answered with collective punishment, making entire communities pay for one act of defiance. The strategy worked. Centuries later, millions still carry the genetic proof of these policies. It is a biological conquest that still shapes populations. And yet, the numbers and the science cannot match the horror of a single event. In 1223, after the Oirat Confederation resisted and fell, Genghis Khan ordered a public act of vengeance. Every Oirat girl between 7 and 15 was taken, 4,000 in total. Soldiers swept through camps, tearing children from their mothers' arms, lining them in the public square for a demonstration of complete domination. The campaign spanned 3 days, systematically rounding up victims from dispersed villages. Precision served cruelty. The girls were herded to Kyalik, the Oat capital, displayed in the central square before gathered Oirat and Mongol crowds. They stood in orderly rows. The arrangement was intentional. Disorder would weaken the impact. This was punishment as spectacle. Genghis Khan spoke directly to the assembly. Through interpreters, he declared that Oirat defiance demanded unique retribution. Their men would perish knowing their lineages ended. Their women would witness their daughters' ruin. Their children would serve their destroyers. Parents faced an illusion of choice. Total submission meant their daughters would only become sexual slaves. Any resistance meant watching them tortured to death. Most parents broke, pleading for mercy that never came. The Mongols had calculated perfectly, turning parental love into a tool against defiance. What followed was public, methodical, and deliberately drawn out. The 4,000 girls were split among military units. In plain view of their families, the mass violation began. The Mongols built platforms for maximum visibility. No one could turn away. The logistics betrayed the planning. Feeding and controlling 4,000 victims required infrastructure, holding pens, guard shifts, even medical teams. This wasn't impulsive savagery, but orchestrated terror, planned over weeks. Accounts describe parents cut down while reaching for their children, or forced to watch at sword point. The screams of thousands of young voices carried for miles. Mongol soldiers worked in relays, sustaining the assault for days. What followed shattered something fundamental in onlookers. The atrocity's aim wasn't just physical violation, but spiritual obliteration. The Mongols made parents complicit. Watch your daughter's torment or cause her death. Love became a weapon of destruction, making protection impossible. 2 girls died during the public assault, their bodies displayed as warnings while the horror continued. The Mongols called this mercy. Only 2 deaths among 4,000 showed restraint. Survival became its own torture. After the spectacle, the girls were distributed per standard practice, branded as daughters of Oat rebels, marked for especially brutal treatment across the empire. Their origins became a lifelong curse. Many were sent to the lowest military units, often foreign auxiliaries, the Mongols savoring the irony of rebel girls serving other conquered peoples. The 2 who died were the fortunate ones. Survivors faced years of systematic abuse. The youngest, aged 7 or 8, were held until they were useful, raised in sexual slavery, knowing no other existence. The Mongols stole not just innocence, but identity. The Oirat never recovered. Their population plummeted, their culture fractured. Survivors fled rather than rebuild, carrying trauma through generations. The public atrocity achieved its goal, proving resistance brought not just death but collective defilement. Other tribes took note. When Mongol armies approached, cities surrendered faster. The Oat atrocity became a shorthand for total submission or total horror. The psychological warfare triumphed. The Mongols learned public sexual violence crippled resistance more than military defeat. They honed and reused the tactic, though never again on such a scale. But at Urgench, they perfected it further, innovating new ways to weaponize sexual violence. As the empire grew, so did their methods. What started as organized brutality became refined torture. Each conquered culture added to their arsenal of horrors. From Chinese manuals, they learned psychological timing. Immediate assaults post-defeat differed from delayed ones, where fear amplified terror. Persians introduced chemical enhancements, substances that heightened pain, delayed healing, or triggered specific reactions, turning ancient medicine into torture. Red-hot irons were just the start. Physical pain had limits. Bodies adapted, minds dissociated. So, the Mongols added layers, forcing family participation, making victims choose between horrors, creating hierarchies where victims harmed each other for slight advantages. They pioneered sensory assault, keeping women in darkness for days, then attacking in blinding light, or bombarding them with constant noise. Victims' screams, Mongol chants, or tortured loved ones. Temperature became a weapon. Assaults in freezing cold or searing heat, dehydration intensifying agony. They tailored tactics by region, mapping how climate amplified suffering. From steppe traditions came animal cruelty, war horses trained for specific brutalities, dogs used to terrorize. Combining human and animal assault tapped primal fears across cultures. Sewing orifices shut went beyond death, serving as symbolic violence. Bodies became messages of what resistance earned. They developed executions for sexual defiance, with women who killed their rapists' children facing mirrored tortures or genital mutilation. Punishments were catalogued, standardized, and taught. Spiritual violation matched physical. Victims were forced to blaspheme during assaults, curse their gods, and praise Genghis Khan, often in sacred spaces, amplifying trauma. Mongol records later detailed techniques, sequences, and victim responses, creating torture manuals like technical guides. Brutality became bureaucratic. Yet the psychological torment outstripped the physical. Fathers choosing which daughter was raped first, mothers picking which child lived or died, mercy twisted into cruelty. The Mongols mastered impossible choices, even delaying consequences. Women complied to save families, only to watch them die anyway. Some were promised freedom after a set number of years, only to have those promises shattered again and again. Hope itself became another tool to crush the spirit. The use of children reached new depths of cruelty. Sons were forced to watch their mothers violated, then made to serve the very men who had done it. Daughters became pawns to control their mothers, and mothers were used to control daughters. Family ties were twisted into chains of mutual torment. Even healing was weaponized. Medical care was offered not from mercy, but to keep victims alive for further abuse. Mongol physicians learned how to mend just enough to ensure a body could endure more. Knowledge that could save lives was turned into a method of prolonging suffering. It is in this world we meet the concubine who would change everything, a Tangut princess who had lost all she loved. She was 16 when her city was set aflame, 19 when she resolved to kill a god. Princess Gurbel of the Tangut kingdom stood on the palace walls as the Mongol army encircled Inwan. Her father, Emperor Xiongzong, had allied with Genghis Khan's enemies, a fatal error. The siege lasted 6 months. When spring came in 1227, the Mongols broke through. Gurbel saw her brothers executed in the courtyard, their heads fixed on spears. Her mother threw herself from the highest tower to avoid capture. Gurbel tried to follow, but was dragged back by Mongol hands. During the selection, her royal blood and beauty marked her for the Khan himself. She scored 98 on their grotesque evaluation scale, nearly perfect. The only flaw, according to the examiner, was the defiance in her eyes. That defiance would one day end an empire. The journey to Genghis Khan's mobile court took weeks. She traveled in a special wagon with other high-value captives, memorizing every face, knowing most would vanish into the machinery of Mongol exploitation. She survived by clinging to one thought: revenge. Each night in his bed fed her resolve. Up close, she saw the cracks. The great Khan, feared across the world, was aging. His breathing was heavy in sleep, his body slowed by old wounds. The destroyer of nations was mortal flesh that could bleed. Gurbel acted the part flawlessly, submissive but not broken, present but never seductive. She learned enough Mongolian to follow orders, but not enough to be seen as a threat. She became a fixture in the background, overhearing the rhythms of court life, when guards changed shifts, which nights the Khan drank, how thoroughly women were searched, and where searches were lax. Her knowledge accumulated drop by drop. The dagger came from an older concubine, a Jean princess who had survived 15 years in service. It was passed during bathing, no words spoken, only a shared look heavy with meaning. The blade was slim, easy to hide, honed for one fatal thrust. Gurbel told herself it had once been her mother's. In truth, it was stolen from a careless guard, but imagining her mother's hand on the hilt gave her strength. She practiced in the dark, building muscle memory for one perfect motion. Weeks passed. The Khan's health worsened. The Tangut campaign had drained him. He spent more nights in his tent, summoning women to ward off the creeping shadow of death. The chance came during a thunderstorm. The Khan had been drinking fermented mare's milk to mark a minor victory. That morning he had noticed her. Now he called for her specifically. The storm would cover noise. The guards would be distracted. It was the moment she had waited for. She hid the dagger in her hair, styled so intricately that no one thought to search it. Her hands shook as she prepared, and the servants assumed it was fear. Every step to his tent felt like wading through deep water. She knew she would die, but first she would balance the scales. Not for the millions destroyed. No death could repay that. But for her mother's leap from the tower, her brother's severed heads, 3 years of degradation, she would make the violator feel violation. Inside, the tent was heavy with incense. The Khan lay among silk cushions, half drunk, his eyes dulled with wine and years. She approached slowly, every movement rehearsed. The thunder swelled outside. As she lowered herself beside him, her hand slid to the blade. His eyes were already closing, secure in the illusion of absolute power. She thought of her burning city, of girls in line for selection, of everything stolen. She pulled the dagger free. "For the Tangut," she whispered in perfect Mongolian. On that night, as the Khan reached for her, she reached for something else entirely. 8 centuries later, women in many of the regions the Mongols conquered still veil themselves. This is why. The Mongol terror did not end when their armies left. It burned itself into the cultural memory, shaping everything from city planning to marriage customs. In Central Asia, families began practicing extreme purdah, women hidden not just from strangers but from distant relatives. The reasoning was born of trauma. If invaders returned, unseen women might escape notice. Invisibility became survival, passed down until the original reason was forgotten. Architecture changed. Homes gained secret rooms, escape passages, and false walls. Cities were designed with women's quarters deep inside, protected by layers of defense. Marriage ages dropped sharply. Parents rushed to wed daughters soon after puberty, believing marriage offered protection through the husband's family. The Mongols had turned youth into a danger that demanded immediate shielding. Statistics of population loss show only part of the truth. The greater wound was psychological. Whole regions lived with collective scars that outlasted empires. Folk tales began to carry warnings for young women, stories where strangers were always predators. Mothers sang lullabies that slipped in instructions on how to escape. From the earliest years, children were taught to fear. The Mongols had weaponized sexuality so completely that entire societies responded with equal extremes. Some communities turned to honor killings, convinced that death was better than dishonor. Others invented invasive virginity tests, building elaborate systems to prove sexual purity as a defense against history repeating itself. Even language shifted. Words for rape, pregnancy, and violence were altered or erased. In some places, euphemisms became so complex that speaking openly about sexual violence became impossible. The unspeakable was erased from speech itself. Religious life adapted. New prayers asked for divine protection against sexual harm. Pilgrimage sites formed at places where women had chosen death over capture, honoring them as saints. In many regions, gender segregation reached new extremes. Public spaces were for men alone. Women's movements required careful planning, chaperones, and permission. Mixed gatherings vanished entirely. In the shadow of Mongol violence, the meeting of men and women became synonymous with danger. Economic customs changed to match. Dowries rose as families desperately sought husbands to protect their daughters. Women's inheritance rights were stripped away. Property ownership could draw dangerous attention. Financial invisibility became another shield. Military strategies were permanently altered, with armies trained to hide women during sieges and cities designed with secret chambers for female residents. The lesson learned was brutal and clear. Defeat meant systematic rape, and protection often meant imprisonment. Societies scarred by the Mongols' violence kept their women restricted for centuries. In many ways, the cure became its own form of disease. But the greatest irony would play out in the Khan's own tent. While millions suffered under his rule, Genghis Khan himself would fall to a woman's blade. The man who had built an empire on sexual terror would die by it. Modern DNA studies reveal the aftermath. Around 16 million living descendants carry genetic proof of the campaign. Each marker in their cells tells a story of forced pregnancies, broken families, and generations reshaped by violence. The Mongols' sexual warfare remains the largest organized system of rape in recorded history. No other conquest matched its scale or long-lasting impact. On a stormy night in 1227, that machine of terror met poetic justice. Thunder covered the sound as Princess Gurbel's blade struck its target. The Khan, expecting submission, felt shock instead. Blood spread across silk sheets, black in candlelight. His hands reached for the place where his power had been, finding only pain. She did not run at once. For a few heartbeats, she watched his eyes shift from confusion to realization to fear. The man who had violated thousands now knew violation himself. "For every woman you destroyed," she whispered in perfect Mongolian, "every daughter stolen, every mother broken, they send their regards through me." She slipped from the tent into the storm. Guards, distracted by the rain, did not notice her passing. As she ran through the camp, women from every corner of the empire saw her blood-stained clothes and understood. Chinese girls peered from fabric walls, Persian women clutched children, Russian nobles sat in golden chains. They bowed, they wept, but no one spoke. At the river's edge, swollen with rain, Gurbel did not hesitate. The water swallowed her instantly, carrying her downstream. By the time Mongol search parties found her body, the damage was done. The great Khan was dead, his empire beginning to fracture. His generals hid the truth behind stories of illness or accidents. They erased her name from official records, but her story spread among women like a secret flame. The princess who killed the monster became legend. The empire's machinery of sexual slavery rolled on, but something had cracked. If the Khan himself could be killed by one of his captives, no man was untouchable. Fear, once a weapon only of the conqueror, now cut both ways. Gurbel's blade proved that even the most absolute power could bleed, that every abused woman was a potential assassin. The Mongol sexual terror, though it scarred continents and altered the human genome, carried within it the seeds of its own destruction. The tent is silent now. The storm has passed, but the echo of thunder remains.